for the sake of him who gave himself for us, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This house is in session. This house is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, May 4th, 2021, and Tuesday, May 11th, 2021 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker.
I'm in receipt of the Auditor General's report for the year 2020.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Pesticides Control Amendment Regulations 2021.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills. Customs. Customs bill.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Customs Bill
Customs Bill 2020.
2021.
Second, please.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 1, in the name of the Honorable Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, to the approval of the lease of the 2 parcels of land, the property of the Crown, situate at Pine in the parish of St. Michael in this island, to TAB Building Limited for use as a car park.
Honorable Member for Christchurch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This, I guess I would have to refer to this as a new old matter. And it's interesting to suggest that it is a new old matter, but in truth and fact, it is. This is a lease that first started way back in 1995. Lease agreement dated September 1st, 1995, between the Crown and TAB Limited and the then now Life of Barbados Limited, which then commenced on September the 1st, 1995, and ended on August 31st, 2010. So this essentially is a renewal of a lease that had been in place from then. And at the time, it was first for 1 parcel of land. But subsequent to that, the then TAB building, which is essentially the car park behind that building on Kalmarock, I think it's Price Waterhouse, the Price Waterhouse building. They use the part behind, which is Crown land, as a car park. And from the 1995 period when the lease started to then 2010, they then came and asked government for an additional piece of land for a second car park. That lease then came to an end, and we now have to do a renewal for the 2 pieces together. So this is a new lease that covers an old matter. So essentially, what we're asking to do is to grant the lease of 2 parcels of Crown land, together measuring 3,916 square meters. One is 1,901 square meters, and the other 2,014.8 at Pine St. Michael to TAB Building Limited for the use of car park. And the rental will be $29,141.80 per annum. This lease we expect to run for 10 years with a rent review every 3 years and an option for a further renew for a further 10 years. Obviously, and of course, the car park is already existing, so I would not have to go into all of the issues that relate to the town planning process. The TAB building went through the town planning process quite significantly. In fact, the survey plan 429-2016 was prepared by the land surveyor Kevin Belgrave, certified on April 25th, 2016, recorded in Lands and Surveys Department on May 4th, 2016. So all the processes have been gone through. All of the areas have been confirmed. The resolution has been examined by the Attorney General and certified to be in order. The more important, though, and pressing matter of this resolution is, and I have to say that sometimes the Crown, in order to keep track of all of its lands and all of its leases and all of the various entities that has entered into leases or sales or whatever over the years, it's quite difficult and quite time-consuming. And do we have enough ability and capability within the ministry or within government to keep track of all of these leases? Keep track of when leases come to end, when leases must start, How do we change how we charge for things? Has the person who we've granted the lease to complied with all of the things that we've asked them to do? Have they used it for something other than we give them permission to, than Parliament has given permission to? It is a huge and mammoth task. Indeed, as a simple landlord often has difficulty not only collecting rent, seeing that tenants comply, seeing that people are not trying to take up more of your land. I'll give you an example. In a certain constituency in Barbados, in fact, in a certain housing area, we have people who try to expand and move their fence. Not the housing area people, but the people surrounding. Try to move their fence and take up land belonging to the National Housing Corporation or to government. Hoping then that nobody notices, nobody recognizes, and then after a period of 10 years, come and produce something saying that we want something called adverse possession. Because nobody can come and tell us about this. We have now taken up this piece of land. We have maintained it. We put some sort of hut or fence on it, and now we could get it by adverse possession. This kind of thing is so important that we must not only monitor our lands, recognize where we have lands, we must maintain our boundaries, maintain the payments, see that people are totally compliant with what they're supposed to do, and manage these all over the country with all the Crown land, all the land owned not only by National Housing Corporation, but all the land owned by BADMC, BIDC, and all the other schools, and all these other things, because government, whether like it or not, is the biggest landowner. And with the owning of land, not only comes the benefit of the land, but also comes a duty and a responsibility to maintain the lands that you own. And this is important. And it is something I think that we fall down on from time to time. And what we're doing in the ministry is we're trying to strengthen that. So those people who feel that they're going to come and put up a fence to try to take on some of the National Housing Corporation land, you got another thing coming because we go in court on that. And he who I speak of, I hope you're listening to hear what I am saying. Because I am not standing for people coming to take up what is not theirs and try to claim it. So to he who I am speaking, move that fence and move it quick, because otherwise we go in court. Mr. Speaker, as you know, I tend to be a very straight-talking person, straightforward, do not mix my words, and I keep to my word every single time, without exception. Without exception. And I first want the members here in Parliament to support this measure. It is a new, old measure. It is something that we've been working on in the ministry for quite a while, and I'm very happy to have had a chance to bring it here to Parliament so that we could get approval on it and to put this matter to rest. I know it's $29,000 per year. It's not a big amount for the amount of land, but you know what? It's $29,000 a year. I could build a house for somebody with that. So if we could put that $29,000 into the consolidated fund, that is money that a senior citizen could benefit from. Maybe in your constituency, Mr. Speaker. Maybe in mine. Maybe in St. Michael West. $29,000 a year. In 2 years, that's 2 old people. People who would have benefited, who would have given their all to this country, to build this country to what it is. Those people whose shoulders we now stand on to reach the heights that we have been able to reach. So, Mr. Speaker, with those words, I would ask that this resolution do not pass.
Can I see? A seconder?
Just a second, sir.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed. Yeah, no, order 2. Order number 2.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of the Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, to approve the vesting of the Crown land situated at Lot A, Wildy, in the parish of St. Michael, in the island, with the buildings thereon, in the Caribbean Development Bank, a regional financial institution established by agreement dated the 18th day of October, 1969, for use as its headquarters. Thank you.
All member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if the previous debate was a new old matter, I would have to say that this one is a new ancient matter, because this now goes back to 1979, 1969, 1970, and it has had certain iterations in between there from time to time. This essentially, Mr. Speaker, is an agreement between the government of Barbados and the Caribbean Development Bank to be able to give them opportunities to be able to lease land for their headquarters. And this is now coming to fruition because the government, from the time the government of Barbados and CDB took in from June of 1970, the government agreed, and I quote, to keep the bank's requirements for space under continuing review unless and until the bank assumes responsibility for such requirements, and to make contiguous or other appropriate premises available to the bank as and when required. So the first part that was given to the bank, which they started, was conveyances in July 28th of 1983, and then again November 23rd of 2009, when the government conveyed 2 adjoining vacant parcels of land to the Caribbean Development Bank free of charge. So this now, this is one part of 424 acres which were conveyed to the Crown way back in 1969. So this land now is an additional portion that we are giving another 3.51 acres of Crown lands to the Caribbean Development Bank. I understand that the Caribbean Development Bank is going to expand their headquarters, not only providing, again, parking, but also improving the building and making it an even better building, of which not only the Caribbean can be proud, but us in Barbados, of having them headquartered here, can equally be proud. So this is another important lease that we've been working on for quite some time. And what we want to do is to get these matters recorded. So the lands on which the headquarters stand were surveyed by Mr. Anderson R. Allen, land surveyor, in January 2021, and recorded as survey plan number 8021. The land was found to contain a total of 14,193 square meters. So another simple matter, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want to think that the Caribbean Development Bank would not keep to its commitments and be able to develop the land completely in keeping with what the expectations would be of a good government and indeed a good financial institution. And I have no doubt that, that they will be totally in compliance with all town planning regulations, all the requirements of the lease, and everything associated. Indeed, the CDB has been an excellent partner for Barbados for a long time. They assist us with many, many financial transactions throughout all the government, and many ministries have been touched. And we're privileged to have them here, and we're privileged to be a partner with them to be able to build out not only Barbados, by extension, to build out the Caribbean. So therefore, I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that this resolution do now pass.
Hardly the opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it is unfortunate that Parliament continues to send the signal to the Barbadian public that land policy is an issue of secondary importance in relation to other matters. Unfortunate that government and this administration presently continues to signal that land policy is pursued in an ad hoc fashion. We come here from time to time and we discuss, debate measures relative to land use. And the impression can easily be received by the onlooking or listening public that this is a matter of insignificance. We do it incidentally. Land matters come here as stopgaps, fill-ins on the parliamentary agenda. We have come here today on this, is it the 25th? Mr. Speaker, day of May, in the year of our Lord 2021, to sit for 10 minutes to consider two resolutions relative to the use of Crown lands. And we pass these resolutions and we go, not a done deal, not a parliamentary day, and that's it. I believe that governments in Barbados, that this administration needs to have a fuller, deeper appreciation for the importance of land policy and for the use of Crown lands over time in Barbados. There is tremendous value attaching to land. Private developers know that. Private interests benefit significantly from that in Barbados and have done so historically. It didn't start 3 years ago on the 25th of May. This has been going on traditionally, historically in our context, where private interests, sometimes narrow private interests, have significant benefits conveyed to them by how land is used and by how our land policy is formulated in this country. And they understand the value that attaches to land. They understand the issue of ownership. I've been saying for quite some time, and my voice has not been alone in that the business of ownership must be a principal concern of any government at any time. I have noticed in recent days, I think I saw it reported that the Honorable Prime Minister was stressing the issue of ownership. And that must be in Barbados, where we have to bring, as a moral responsibility and as a principal obligation of the government, the majority of people, as many as possible, into ownership in Barbados. Now, when you talk ownership, I think to a large extent, you're talking ownership of capital, but you're talking ownership of land, which constitutes a very important component of capital assets. You cannot continue to see this as an incidental matter. We come here sometimes to have land transferred to this entity or that, whether it is a regional institution or private interests, and we've done it in both respects. The point I'm wanting to make here today is that land policy has to be viewed as a critical component of any policy platform of any serious government. And I don't know that this government has yet signaled that. I have attempted more than once to say, in my view, we want to bring people into ownership. We want to develop housing programs. We need to see a reformed, a revolutionized role for the state-owned housing entity, which we call the National Housing Corporation. And we need to see more robust attempts to bring people into ownership of land and thereby facilitate them with housing. Now, if I am to make reference to government's recent awkward move of offering land to the public of Barbados. I think it was in St. James somewhere. And after people had expressed interest and actually took action to come into ownership, then to change the policy into something else. That in itself suggests that we're not sufficiently seriously appreciating the value of land and the importance of bringing people into ownership as quickly as possible. There's some who will, of course, dispute that, but I can only give you my view on the matter. And so I believe any serious land policy has to be driven by an appreciation and understanding of the value of land and the primacy of ownership, and especially ownership with reference to land. Land has been used historically in this country, and nobody has to tell us whether we are black or white. Land has been used historically in this country to monetize labor, in a context where that labor was free labor, in a context where that labor was slave labor. But over the years, land has been used to monetize labor in Barbados. That tells me, Mr. Speaker, that if you want, as a serious government, to empower and enrich your people, your country, your nation, you have to change the nature of the relationship between labor and the land. Right now, in the majority instance, labor in Barbados is disenfranchised and dispossessed with respect to land. And I would think that a principal obligation to any government, and especially a government awarded 30 seats in a general election, would be to try to change the nature of the relationship between labor and land in Barbados. The equation, as it has been historically, remains pretty much the same. The majority of those who constitute the working class in Barbados, majority of those who constitute labor in Barbados, are still dispossessed and not empowered when it comes to the business of ownership of land. So we have to see it as an important component of our mandate and a response to the needs of the country. As a government, we be one of the principal instruments, if not the primary instrument, in changing the nature of the relationship between labor and the land. Land has been used, Mr. Speaker, you know this well, to embellish capital in Barbados and to establish a platform of prosperity for those who become the beneficiary of ownership by whatever means in this country. We have embellished, we have facilitated the increase of the position of capital in this country by land policy, either by omission on the part of whatever administration ruled the day, or by acts deliberately, intentionally done by respective administrations. We have continued to help construct a platform of prosperity for those who are already in the land owning class. So we have built for them a bigger platform, stronger platforms. We have increased their means and embellished capital, while to a large extent still labor flounders. And in fact, in embellishing capital, we have helped to further what some people refer to as persistent poverty among the working class. You have a background, I think, Mr. Speaker, in sociology. You would have addressed your mind to these issues. You're a working class man. You represent working class communities across the Michael Central. You are familiar with this. And you know that part of the problem is that dispossession among working class people. That is why you have the persisting problem at Bellevue, or parts of it. And it must be perceived by a government with such numbers that we have to change that relationship to which I earlier referred. We have to realize that a lot of what we do facilitates the further platforming for prosperity of a class which is already significantly beneficiaries in respect to ownership of land. And we have been, perhaps incidentally, perhaps by our omission or by our commission, acts of commission, furthering the plight of the poor with respect to disposition and institutionalizing further by our actions or lack of action, persistent poverty dynamic with respect to land ownership in Barbados. These things are true. We have land use in this country which facilitates the entrenchment, furtherance of a commercial or retail sector. The Barbados economy largely, a large component of the Barbadian economy is retail and commercial activity. And land in Barbados has been used historically, and in even a changed context is still being used to keep people tied to a plantation economy system. Now that's a history. Come forward from the days of slavery, you go through a period of indentureship, you come to the now, and the sugarcane fields are barren. Bush has taken its place, and to a little extent, privileged construction has replaced the sugarcane, and our fields now lie largely idle. But the plantation economy system still remains. High component of it is commercial and retail activity, or import and sell activity. And land has been used to facilitate this type of economy. And the government must be aware that if we're to change the profile of our economy, if we're to change our economic profile, then we have to reflect very much upon how land is used in this regard. We cannot come to government and find things as they are, with institutionalized systems and culture repressing the majority of our people, frustrating their aspirations for upward economic mobility, and leave the office of government only having done the superficial things, the cosmetic things, which in themselves have not revolutionarily changed the context of the lives of our people. I'm simply saying that land has to be seen for what it is worth in terms of its value, and the use of policy with respect to land for its effective potential to change the plight of people and their relationship to the economy. Land has been used to help build the middle class in Barbados. It's not all negative, and I'm not here to say no government over time has done anything of significance to address land policy in Barbados. That would be totally dishonest. I sat on the other side once, and I know that things were done in a positive way to improve the lot of people. And I know that things have been done outside of that context of the other side to improve the lot of people in Barbados. But the question has to be asked, has sufficient been done and intentionally done to change the plight of people, to change the relationship of working class labor to the economy, to address the institutionalized systems and culture around the plantation economy, that keeps poor people poor and helps to facilitate always a privileged few in their efforts to build upon that platform which already has been constructed. So we've seen a development of a middle class in Barbados, and that's positive use of land policy. And there must be more of this. And in recent times, in the last couple of years, with the COVID situation, the collapse of the tourism industry, and prior to that, with perhaps not the best and most prudent economic policies in the previous, under the previous administration, we have seen the erosion of a lot of the base and well-being that has propped up the middle class in Barbados, and that has been their experience. But land has been used, and we have got to reckon with, in terms of rebuilding what is lost among middle class elements in Barbados and expanding the middle class in Barbados, how we can make land policy work towards that end. Land is a highly valuable commodity when it comes to being in a position to have collateral, either to get into business activity or to build above and beyond that which you have been able to do at the moment. All I'm saying is we have to be very positive in our view about the value of land. And we cannot continue with the incidental, almost superficial, by the way, ad hoc, now and then stopgap filling approach to land policy that reflects itself when we come to the Parliament of Barbados. Land has been used very positively to change the character of both rural and urban Barbados. The tenantries program introduced by the Adams administration in the 80s, the tenantries program also initiated under the Arthur administration, 90s and so forth, served to really improve the lot of a lot of people in urban Barbados and rural Barbados through the Urban and Rural Development Commissions. People were brought into ownership of land, and you had plantation, tenantry land available to people in rural Barbados at 10 cents a square foot. And to the extent that Barbados had a lot of plantations historically in urban Barbados, people who lived in urban Barbados on what traditionally had been, historically had been plantation land, benefited from those very low prices and came into ownership. And on that, they were able to raise families, build houses, and the whole character and the aesthetic appearance of many communities in urban Barbados and rural Barbados has been changed. The message coming out of that is not only about the capacity to empower people, but it has to do with the business of urbanization. And any serious government about its business has to be concerned, especially in 2021, as to where it is going on a policy of urbanization. And I don't know that I've heard any clear definitive statement on that. Urbanization is a phenomenon that brings with it a lot of other very significant dynamics, some positive, some negative. You're a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, and you know these things. And I am saying your land policy must in some way take cognizance of a policy on urbanization, and I don't know that I have even heard a reference to such links in the mouthings of the government. Land has also been used to attract or to make more attractive Barbados as a jurisdiction for investment, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I am still solidly of the view that when it comes to the business of foreign investment into Barbados that necessitates ownership of land, that policy has to be prudent and cautious and well guided, and must take serious cognizance of the impact of that policy or a particular initiative in investment with reference to how it affects the Barbadian population. So it is all right to use it to make yourself more attractive as an investment area for specific project or projects, but you can't do that without reference to how it impacts Barbadians and Barbadian communities. You know, I still wait to see what happens in the Bay Street, Nelson Street, Bridgetown area once we see the Hyatt development, if it ever takes place, once we see it take place. And whether other investment along that corridor comes, what is going to be happening with reference to those who have been residents of the surrounding areas. And of course, many of them have been living in not the best of social economic conditions, been living the plight of the poor. But you are going to be creating a situation where affluence and all of the aesthetics that come along with that, and all of the other logistical considerations that will accompany development along that area will clash and conflict with traditional dynamics of poverty existing side by side. I wait to see if the plight of the poor will be improved, or if the poor will be dislocated and disadvantaged in the interest of facilitating those who are better privileged. Now, I really don't want to be too long. I think the members on the other side are anxious to get out of here. And I don't want to create any discomfort for the Honorable Minister of Housing either. There have been some complaints coming from certain quarters about the marginalization, the exclusion of the National Housing Corporation with respect to the award of contracts which have to do with housing and land projects, one or two of which are in prominent focus at this time. And complaints have come from over there as to the role of the National Housing Corporation and the fact that it seems to have been marginalized in recent time. The complaints have come from over there, Mr. Speaker, over there on that matter. I have raised a question with respect to the HOPE project ongoing and the role of the National Housing Corporation, which I still think needs to be further and better clarified by the principal spokespersons on the other side on matters of housing and land development. But it would seem as though that the NHC has resigned itself or has been dismissed as an entity of importance with respect to the business of overseeing, managing government lands, award of contracts, etc. The minister, honorable minister, in recent times caused me to be a little bit confused because I heard him in trying to explain the circumstances around the award of contract for the HOPE project suggests that Rule 239 was used because we had an urgent situation. We have high unemployment in the country as a result of the collapse of the tourism industry. We need to put people back to work urgently, so you can't hang about.
On a point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Christchurch West.
I'm sorry to stop the honorable member in full flight, but I made it clear that Rule 239 was not used. Was not used. Not it was used. Was not used.
And hence my confusion, Mr. Speaker, because I heard the minister explain that you had to make recourse to Rule 239 in a situation where it was urgent and you had to get people back to work. I heard that. But then subsequently, I heard the minister say
On a point of
Rule
again, Mr.
239
Speaker,
was not used.
clearly,
Honorable Robertson.
yeah, clearly the honourable member is relating to something that was on brass tacks. So basically, the person, the moderator, was suggesting that Rule 239 was used, but they obviously had made an error and probably this is what has added to the confusion of the honorable member. So Rule 239 is used in certain circumstances. What comes to mind is the rejuvenation project, which we had to get moving very, very quickly, which this honorable House would have approved monies for. But with respect to the housing program, it was not used.
And all I'm saying is that, Mr. Speaker, I'm confused because I heard the honorable minister who just spoke say Rule 239 is used in certain circumstances, one of which is a circumstance of emergency or urgency. And tell me, these were in effect his words, tell me, if you have got all of these people unemployed, what constitutes a situation of urgency more than that? So I heard that. And then subsequently I heard him to say that it was not used. So hence my confusion. And all I'm saying is I'm confused. That's all I'm saying. And yes, that is true. That is quite easy. That is quite easy to do. But I suspect that there are a lot of other people who are equally confused, and it's not so easy to confuse some of them. But when you stress, if this does not constitute an urgent matter, then what does? I don't know that has been clarified. I'm even more confused now. That's easy to do, as was stated. But since the minister wants to be combative today, let's stay for a while. I'm not going to sit down so quickly again, Mr. Speaker. Let's stay for a while. And so, a voice from over there I heard complain in this very chamber about perceived marginalization of the NHC in its role. And I still think that that is an issue, and it needs to be better clarified by the honorable minister, who always speaks with a very honest voice. That needs to be better clarified as to the role of the NHC. I have a view that this administration has embarked upon a policy which was applied to politics, is now being applied to government, of what I call parallelism. Parallelism. And that is, Mr. Speaker, in an effort to create a context for better control, in an effort to perhaps get around regulations a bit, in an effort perhaps not to subject yourself to as full as scrutiny as perhaps you would desire, you create parallel entities because you want to achieve political ends as well as governmental public service ends. So you have your National Housing Corporation, but you create an entity called HOPE. And HOPE does, in the immediate instance, what NHC perhaps would normally do if it were in a position so to do, and the question has to be answered as to whether or not it is. And then the further question is, beyond HOPE, what next? Will there be more HOPE? Will there be greater HOPE? Will there be new HOPE beyond HOPE? So what is the future role for the NHC? And are we creating a parallel entity which perhaps we can better control, better influence, better serve not only public service ends, but serve political ends as well? If you make reference to the establishment of a public affairs bureau, the same conclusion is arrived at. You got a government information service, but you've created a public affairs unit. Yes, sir.
I remember.
Yes, sir.
Please stick to the issue relative to land, please.
And I'm sticking to the issue, very clearly sticking to the issue. And the issue is, are we creating a parallel entity that relieves the NHC of its functions? And are we creating an entity that we can better manage towards our own ends, whether they're public service-oriented ends, people-oriented ends, or political-oriented ends? That is what I'm speaking to. And I'm illustrating that by reference to the establishment of a public affairs unit, when in fact you have a government information service. So are we seeing an embarkation upon a path where we will have these parallel entities created in Barbados? So, Speaker, there must be full disclosure when it comes to the business of transferring Crown lands to private interests. We have here before us today the CDB, which is a regional institution, and I suppose no problem with that. There is also transfer of property to private entity. I don't even believe there's an issue with that, but I'm speaking in the wider context of things. There has to be fuller disclosure when it comes to these matters. I heard a voice from that side also question the business of facilitation terms when it comes to transfer of Crown lands into the ownership of private interests. If you reference again the HIAC, Mr. Speaker, we were told in this chamber that government was going to relieve the previous owners of the property on Bay Street, Tiny Tots and Merchant Danny and Miss Ram. Sorry for calling that name, but I'm just trying to identify the property, not saying anything about her. We were told that the tourism sector, one of its entities, was going to take over that property and then have it transferred to private interests. Now, nobody is saying necessarily that that is illegal, criminal, immoral, or wrong. What I am saying is that when you are involved in matters like that, because if the state acquires it from the owner, whether under duress or otherwise, when the state legally acquires it from the owner, it becomes state lands. But if you facilitate the transfer to private interest, then the people of Barbados should get to know what are the terms under which this transfer of title and ownership, these things are facilitated. That is all I am saying. I don't know that it has happened fully with respect to the prospective HIAC development. I don't know that it is happening fully with respect to the Hope project, any aspect of it at this time. These are some matters I wanted to raise. I don't want to talk anymore today about the Hope project. I have about 8 or 9 questions there on that, but the minister, honorable minister, has signaled to me he doesn't want to be here too long today, and so I am going to quit.
Honorable for saying James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to enter this debate, and I welcome the opportunity to do so, sir, because that which was said previously by the Leader of the Opposition presents a glorious and I think a necessary opportunity to put some context to that which is happening with regard to housing and the use of land in Barbados and the general policy of the government. It also helps, Mr. Speaker, sir, for us to perhaps clear the air and remove the fog from the memories of fellow Barbadians, clearly one of whom sits in this chamber, who perhaps, sir, have forgotten in the last 3 years, and I can understand there's so much being done. You may become a little bit overwhelmed and begin to fall victim to a convenient form of amnesia, where you forget that which transpired in this sector of housing and use of land in Barbados during the course of the period of the administration of this country under the Democratic Labour Party. And it is all too easy, sir, for people to expect that almost by the wave of a magic wand, you can set all the wrongs right and make perfect that which was completely imperfect when once we came to office 3 years ago. I believe, sir, today is the anniversary of the first day that we would have been in government. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is this, that there is a context to the concerns that are raised. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition spoke, for example, to the need for there to be changes in the institutional structure. And in that regard, he spent some time talking about the ease of access to land and, in general terms, financing. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I could not agree with him more. But let us also face the reality of what had to happen and what was done. Because there is a holistic view that has to be taken of any approach by any government to policy. When we came to office, sir, one of the first things that we did, and I believe I'm correct in saying it may have been on the first sitting of the House, the Minister of Education would have sought to begin the process of making sure that Barbadians were once again able to return to University of the West Indies in circumstances where government was going to cover their tuition costs. And Mr. Speaker, so what is the relevance of that to this? I stand in this House, Mr. Speaker, as a Barbadian who was able to take out a mortgage, not because of any connection I had to a financial institution, but I was able to take out a mortgage at age 26, Mr. Speaker, sir, my first mortgage, by virtue of the fact that when I presented myself to the financial institution, I held qualifications. And the projection was, well, if you are practicing law and you are a professional, then you are going to be in a category that you should be able to pay back the $3,000 a month that mortgage was at the time. It could not have happened, Mr. Speaker, sir, were I not able to graduate with the certificates in my hand. And what people fail to grasp very often is that there was a fundamental improvement in terms of the opportunity presented to our young people, a generation that would otherwise left to the policy of the last administration, a generation that would have been bereft of that opportunity had the opportunity restored. So I begin on that note, sir, of personal I begin on a note, sir, of sharing that personal experience, because it is obviously not only near and dear to me, but it stands without contradiction as being the opportunity or the doorway to opportunity that is presented to several others in this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the honorable member, and I thank him, I genuinely thank him for raising some of these matters, because, as I said, it allows us to have a serious engagement. And we are in no hurry to go anywhere. The reason why I get up to speak today is because I want to engage on this. Land policy, Mr. Speaker, sir, again, one of the first things that this Barbados Labour Party government committed itself to. I remember well, within the first week or two of the life of this administration, sir, the Prime Minister of Barbados made it clear that we were going to change, and in fact, within 6 months did bring a new Town and Country Planning Act to the Parliament of Barbados. And that piece of legislation, sir, speaks directly to the issue of land use policy. And what is it that is at the core of that which we are trying to do, above and beyond facilitating business? But how does it strike to the heart of the ordinary man, sir? It strikes to the heart of the ordinary man because I, at the time, would have been in the Ministry of Tourism. I would have seen, sir, the investors come, happy to breathe fresh air, because of the fact that they were terrorized under the last administration. Men were running for cover because to appear with a project meant that you might end up, sir, in the end of the day, expending the equivalent of 3 projects. And they came, sir, to a new administration, and they want to speak the language of how you can make investments. And the thinking at the time was, and has always been in Barbados, that we're doing investments laterally, as though we're going to find more and more and more land on an island of 166 square miles. This administration recognized up front that there was a need, Mr. Speaker, sir, to break the barrier and go where we had been all reluctant to go before, and to raise the levels at which you can build. So for example, a hotel, instead of a hotel having to take up an extra acre or two, the hotel, sir, can go vertically, and you, instead of stopping at six stories, people were making applications to the town planning department for 11 and 12 stories, sir. I don't function in that ministry, so I can't tell you the status of all of those applications, but I can tell you, sir, that prior to COVID, that was the language that was being spoken about by tourism investors in Barbados. How does it help the ordinary man? It is a land use policy intervention that makes sure, therefore, that there is an opportunity to have maximum utilization of a small footprint for a hotel, and at the same time, have land available for other developmental purposes, for example, housing in the immediate vicinity of the hotel. I have said on the floor of this house repeatedly, it is one of the characteristics that separate us, sir, and distinguish us in the Caribbean as a whole. If you go to Jamaica, you will find that there are hotels and that they are segregated from the communities, especially in the north of Jamaica. Behind tall walls, you will find the hotel, and people are far, far away. I have seen it with my own eyes, sir. Security guards and police officers armed M16 automatic assault rifles. Not so in Barbados. If you go to the Dominican Republic, you see it too. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is not an easy compatibility and a natural flow between the society and the people of the country and the hotel product of the country. In Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir, people walk out of sandals and they walk across the road to Oystins on a Friday night. That's been our experience. Same thing on the west coast of Barbados. All along the west coast, you will find ordinary Barbadians sitting in a rum shop. John Simpson's place there, so in Fitz Village, Mr. Speaker, Wendy's Snack Bar. And that is where all the Englishmen will go, having left a luxury hotel, and watch a little football on a Saturday and a Sunday and a Friday, Mr. Speaker. Reality is that that easy flow is facilitated, but the important point that the Leader of the Opposition raises but does not contact with is that it is an achievement made by this government. So don't stand here now and say that you haven't heard anything about land use policy. When one of the first things we did was to create the town and country planning legislation that facilitated the same land use policy. I'm not talking about a plan. I'm talking about a piece of legislation that was passed in the Parliament of Barbados within the first 6 months of the life of this administration, sir, when the Leader of the Opposition sat where he now sits. Now, he may be tone deaf to that which we said. He may have convenient amnesia. He may be, sir, in a situation where one becomes punch drunk. And if he had to sit down home on Sunday and look at the range of successes that were presented to this nation in our 3-year report, if I was Leader of the Opposition, I too perhaps would be a little punch drunk to come in here this morning. The body blows would have most men wobbling. But that does not give an excuse, Mr. Speaker, sir, to create your own facts. And the fact of the matter is that beyond that, this administration is the first administration in the history of this country, sir, to bring to bear a requirement that investors don't just come and ask for concessions, but that investors must also have some planning gains imposed upon them. So that when you are coming here, sir, to do whatever it is that you propose to do, it is this administration that is saying to you, no, we can help you, but at the same time, you've got to help those people who are mostly in need. It may well be that some of the land that we are going to ask you now to assist us in purchasing is land to do development in a fish market setting, or land to do investment, development in a sporting facility setting like pavilions and so on. Or equally, sir, it may be that it is land so that we can develop housing for poor people in Barbados. But that is part of what has been happening in this country for the last 3 years. I have sat in this parliament and I've heard the leader of government speak to it. I've sat in this parliament and I've heard the honourable member for St. Michael's South Central speak to it repeatedly, Mr. Speaker, sir, in her capacity as minister responsible for economic affairs. So it cannot be new to the leader of the opposition. It cannot be something that he is unfamiliar with, that we have introduced this system of planning gains. And indeed, at the same hayat that he speaks to, sir, at the same hayat that he speaks to, there have been a number of planning gains attached to that development so as to enable poor people in the constituency of the honourable member for the city and in the constituency of the honourable member for St. Michael South to be able to benefit, sir, from assistance that they would not easily otherwise in the financially difficult circumstances confronting this country be able to benefit from. I don't speak, sir, about a plan. I'm speaking about that which is a reality. It is a practice that has come about during the course of the last 3 years. So I look across at the leader of the opposition, I see him bow his head and his shoulders slump under the weight of the reality that is now being brought to bear on him. But I don't feel any sympathy, for he should have done research before he got up to speak. He should have done research before he got up to speak. It is an elementary error that he has made, sir. And I go further. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, he talks about ownership. No. There's not been a government that has brought an aggressive housing program like that which the honourable member is now trying to pilot through Barbados. And I hear the talk about the whole program, and the honourable member will wrap up this debate. I am not going to speak to it for him. But I will say this. Nobody came to my constituency before with a program for housing like how the honourable member for Christchurch West has done. Lancaster, St. James, in fact, that same piece of land, sir, was the source of an allegation of outrageous corruption under the last administration, where it was supposed to have been taken and then resold on instruction from a minister, and that is part of the records of the Public Accounts Committee of the House of Assembly of the Parliament of Barbados. Sold at a price that was ridiculous on the instruction of a minister, Mr. Speaker, sir. But that's what the evidence before the Public Accounts Committee is saying, and the Public Accounts Committee is a document of the House of the Parliament of Barbados. The leader of the opposition must know that. So that I have to defend what happened in that Lancaster, because there's 200 houses being brought to the constituency of St. James Central. I don't expect to get all 200, but I told the honourable member for Christchurch West that there has to be a satisfactory ratio. Has to be. But Mr. Speaker, sir, he didn't stop there. He has gone, sir, to Christchurch, Chancery, where's that? Christchurch East. How many up there? 260 odd, Mr. Speaker, sir. Where have we been hearing about that level of housing development before? And nobody expected it to come about in the context, sir, of the aftermath, not the aftermath, the enduring of COVID. Nobody expected it to come about in the aftermath of the Holocaust of the last decade of the Democratic Labour Party. Yep. What we heard about or what we inherited and what the leader of the opposition campaigned against, but seems now to have conveniently turned his mind and forgotten about, is the fact that the National Housing Corporation that this government inherited 3 years ago, sir, was technically bankrupt. 140 odd million, if not more, in debt, Mr. Speaker. Still in that dire situation. And yet still we are finding creative ways of making sure that we find housing for the people of Barbados. And I'm going to sit down here and stomach this thing about value being attached to land and government not understanding, and that land, there's need for a land policy. There is a land policy, and the land policy is being unrolled, and that private enterprise has partnered with government may stick in the craw of some people of Barbados. But I go further. It isn't just that private enterprise has partnered with government. It is that government has partnered with private enterprise in order to make sure that people who were otherwise shut out now have an opportunity. I am not going to be part of the historical revisionism in this country, Mr. Speaker, sir, because I sat as part of the Public Accounts Committee of Barbados and heard witness after witness come and explain how a cabinet, not the National Housing Corporation Board, but a cabinet determined that certain contractors in Barbados were going to build high-rise houses. I heard the evidence and I saw the evidence, sir. It's part of the records of this house. And we don't have to call the names of the contractors. We know that all of them. And I ain't got nothing against the white people who benefited. But I am going to say, if you're going to come in here and talk about value attached to land, then also talk about the fact that it was this government, and only this government, that made sure we created a cooperative to build together a set of artisans and contractors in Barbados for the first time in the history of this country. And after that was done, it was this government that no sooner they were created, handed them a job. I believe the first job that they would have gone is at Springer School to do repairs on that. So the record of this government, sir, is not that you're taking everything and putting it into the hands of the too few, but that, Mr. Speaker, sir, you're trying to create a category of people who are then in a position to compete in a marketplace and get access to business. And I believe it is true to say that the Honourable Member for Christchurch West had then opened up with regard to the Who building and the Hope and other projects, because the Hope projects are not the only one, opened up an expression of interest to all. And that same cooperative is part of the people who would have been earmarked to do work in this country. A complete transformation to what took place in the last 10 years when men sit down in a cabinet room and determine that they're going to hand to one or two people in Barbados all the construction work in this country, sir. I know all of a sudden I'm hearing it getting muddled, as though people have forgotten that which this government has been doing and how we had to intervene and try to set right the balance. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it's not an easy thing either, because the worst thing you can do is to intervene in too heavy-handed a way and create instability in this society at this critical time when all we have to be holding together, because Barbados, sir, is under unimaginable and unprecedented amounts of pressure. So you have to intervene and make sure that you right-size the ship and that you create fairness where no fairness existed before. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, yes, in pursuit of that equity, however, you can't unfair people either. I want to hear from the Leader of the Opposition what his policy would be. Don't get up here and just point to every imaginable ill that you can find blowing in the wind. What would you have done differently, if anything? You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, you can go on and on. He wants to talk about land use policy. On Friday last, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture chaired a meeting. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central was part of that meeting. I was part of that meeting, and there were 2 other members of the cabinet, where we were looking at the same land use issue, sir, with regard to agriculture and its balance with the effort to renewable energy. And why? The Honourable Member wants to talk about policy, but he does so in a vacuum and in a vapid way. And it is unfair and unfortunate, unfair to the country and unfortunate. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, you're sitting in an office which is constitutional. And with that should come an element of responsibility and gravitas, seriousness. Because, sir, you can't just raise an issue and not speak to the consequences or what you would see as the policy alternatives. We, sir, are confronted with a country that on an annual basis, at a minimum, will spend $450 to $500 million in foreign exchange to import petroleum product into Barbados. And on a difficult year, when there's conflict in the Middle East, Mr. Speaker, sir, we will spend as much as $800 million to import petroleum product into Barbados. There has to be a harness brought to that kind of a runaway expenditure. The only solution is to have a movement towards renewable energy so that we can be in control of the costs as much as humanly possible of the current that we use, the energy we produce and consume. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, to do so, you don't just wave a wand. The renewable energy effort has to be understood to be one that will require the use of the photovoltaics on people's roofs, etc., etc. And equally, there must be photovoltaic farms. We are going to have that. Now, sir, how does it coexist with agriculture? Because while use of the sun for a photovoltaic farm is a land-thirsty exercise. Equally land-thirsty is agriculture. Equally land-thirsty is housing. And Mr. Speaker, sir, Barbados is not getting any bigger. So the serious people in policy don't just get up and say there's a problem. Serious people in policy engage on the problem, find solutions and discuss options about the problem. Not so the Honorable Leader of the Opposition in Barbados. Not so this Honorable Leader of the Opposition. He is a disappointment, sir, some say, because that seat has been held by giants. Tom Adams held that seat. Owen Arthur held that seat. Prime Minister Barbados now held that seat. For us to have a leader of the opposition sitting in that same seat, but offering nothing to the country, saddens me. But Mr. Speaker, sir, that notwithstanding, we have to have the discussions. And if the honourable member wants to talk about land use policy, then these are the things that the government is engaging on, not in itself, by itself, but engaging on with the wider society. So that there's nobody in the agricultural sector in Barbados that does not know that there is a serious effort afoot to find a way in which we can have efforts like raising sheep coexist with renewable energy and the placement of photovoltaic farms. There's nobody in agriculture now who does not know that we are engaging with that sector in terms of how we can use wind energy and have it coexist with sugarcane production. There's nobody in Barbados now, Mr. Speaker, sir, who does not know that with a view to making sure that housing and people who own houses are given a better opportunity in terms of paying their capacity to pay their mortgage. That you are now having discussions with the financial community to use the roof of your house, Mr. Speaker, sir, to locate the photovoltaic energy and then sell back into the grid, putting you in a position where you have a little extra money to pay off your mortgage. There's no serious person in Barbados who's that aware of that. And Mr. Speaker, you know, as I listen to the honourable member, again, what saddens me is the part when he called for change in institutional structures. Now, it's almost as though he caught himself after saying what he said and made reference to the fact that it is this government, not this administration, but certainly the party in government, that created both a rural and an urban development council. But you can't come here now to preach to the converted. We do not need, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be lectured by those who have run away from us on the fact that we did that which we have done. It is a fact that we created the Urban and Rural Development Council, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it is a fact that at the focus of those two enterprises has been institutional reform. And what is it that they do, Mr. Speaker?
I remember commission.
Yes,
council.
commission. And Mr. Speaker, sir, what is it that they do? You know, in my constituency, there are people in Fitzvillage, St. James in particular, who have been able to get title to houses, title to land. Erstwhile, there were tenants. Today, they are title holders, landowners in their own right because of the intervention of the Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, sir. That's a reality. There are people in Barbados today, Mr. Speaker, sir, who live in National Housing Corporation units that are holding title to the units because of the intervention of this particular government and administration, sir. So what institutional reform are we being lectured about when we have gone there where no other government in the history of Barbados has been able to go before us? I don't understand. It is the start of summer. I can't call it midsummer's madness. I don't understand it, Mr. Speaker. Huh? And then it is as though we forget that when we came to government, we found 109 squatters just east of Grantley Adams International Airport. People who lived in the most unfortunate of conditions. People squatting in circumstances where there was limited or no running water. No running water. People who were borrowing electricity, automatically in danger of massive fire hazard. People who should not be living in the circumstances they were living in, Mr. Speaker, sir, in 2018, far less living in those circumstances at all. They were living effectively in a dump. And this Barbados Labour Party has intervened and lifted the plight of those squatters in the teeth of protests coming from certain opposition sources in this country, in the teeth of the harshness of the economic circumstances confronting Barbados. We took out all 109 of those squatters, Mr. Speaker, sir, and have them located now in places like Carpenter's Glade and Parish Land Extension and so on around Barbados, because they are human beings and they must be treated as human beings should be treated in a country, sir. Or the process of locating them is ongoing. And it is, I have no difficulty because I understand opposition politics. I have been there and I have done that. I have led the, what is the office called? Lead of opposition business. Mr. Speaker, I know the need to engage. But Mr. Speaker, I have always felt that you engage in a manner that is sensible and developmental. You don't just get up and engage for the sake of engaging without knowing what you're engaging about. There is no way, there's no shape, there's no form. What we were treated to today is the most unfortunate set of amorphous absurdity that has ever been descended upon, vomited out on the floor of this house. And Mr. Speaker, sir, how can you be calling for recognition of the value of land when a government stands up and in the teeth of all criticisms says, look, we understand that we cannot send and we will never send a signal to people that you just come and squat and expect to get benefits. We said that clearly. But equally we say that we have to correct inhumanity and subhuman conditions where they exist. And that if we continue to allow that which was happening just east of the airport to continue to happen, you are asking for colossal disaster and there must be an intervention. And part of what government is about is to make hard decisions and make difficult interventions because you're doing so in the greater good of the people. We took that position, not for the only time, because it was only a few weeks ago that same kind of principle was applied when we had to close down a certain recycling, when the chief fire officer made it clear that he closing down a certain recycling enterprise because it was compromising the safety, sir, of how many people in that neighborhood? A couple hundred people, or maybe by extension, a couple thousand. And you have a whole district like Melrose and surrounding areas, Mr. Speaker, sir, being threatened. And the chief fire officer said, look, I have a duty. And government, Mr. Speaker, has a duty equally to respond. Difficult circumstances. Why difficult? Because a lot of that which was stockpiled then had to be taken and put back into the metal dump in Bagatelle, in my constituency, Mr. Speaker, so it's difficult for me. I had to say any matter because it's a public health issue, an environmental health issue. And the only assurance I've been given, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that there will not be any hazards to the neighborhood and that it will be compacted and buried as such as was intended from the time you had a metal dump down there.
Your member has 2 more minutes.
So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I understand and I appreciate those honorable members who had to do that which they had to do. And I think the people of the constituency understand and appreciate that that is the purpose of a metal dump and it goes back to its original purpose. If they are not threatened by anything hazardous environmentally, all can be well. But we have a duty, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be responsible. And in the use of land, in a land-scarce country, These are the very real and mature and serious considerations that have to be borne. These are the deliberations, sir, that the House should be engaged in. Not to come in here and make snide comment about how members want to go along early. Every member in here, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure wants to engage on this matter because this matter is at the heart of what governance is about. Not posturing, not, Mr. Speaker, sir, coming across as though you have suddenly discovered that which all people who are familiar vaguely with the history of this country know, that there has been a use of land policy to humbug working class people. But talk about what you now see in part of your current affairs, man. Part of your current affairs, most recently, the last 3 years specifically, tells you that there is an administration that has brought light where darkness previously existed. That is an administration that intervened where people did not have the testicular fortitude or the intestinal fortitude to intervene. That is an administration that applied itself mentally to find solutions, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that part of those solutions lie in the things that I've outlined to this House just now. So that when investors come here and say that they got pockets stretching down to the ankles, we say to them, fine, you can be facilitated, but you can be facilitated if you help carry along some of the working class people in Barbados because they must not be left looking out, looking on. They must be part of the inclusion. Mr. Speaker, sir, talk about the fact that you're sitting in a parliament that renewed a Town and Country Planning Act that was older than the Prime Minister. Huh? That was fit for a purpose when we were a colony. Those are the things that we have to talk about, Mr. Speaker. Not just to come here and make noise and hope that you would catch us a headline and then go downstairs and fire a liquor.
All right, remember, it's time to wrap up, please.
I will wrap up on your command, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'm sorry I didn't speak earlier because I really would have enjoyed another hour at this. I am obliged to you, sir.
Honorable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think that today is a very special day for all of us in this honorable chamber. And for me, the last few days, certainly yesterday and today, have felt quite sobering, have been an opportunity for me to pause and to be grateful to the people of St. Michael South Central, to be grateful to the people of Barbados. The people of St. Michael South Central are the reason that I am here. They're the reason, they're the people who caused me to be here through their overwhelming show of confidence at the polls. But they are also the reason I wanted to be here, sir. Because I have always said that I've never had any particular interest in for the record political activity or for the record policy making. I wanted to come to political life, sir, at a time where I felt I could be of use to the people of my community. I'm a child of St. Michael, and to the people of my country. And so today, sir, reflecting on the last 3 years, for me, is not about being boastful. It is not about patting ourselves on the back. We have a lot of work to do. But it is about being able to look back and take stock and take a record of what this Barbados Labour Party administration has so far been able to achieve, because people talk about hitting the ground running. We hit the sky flying. We had to. We had absolutely no choice. And you know what? People see me on the street all the time and you know, they try to commiserate and they say, oh, it must be so hard. And I think it is a challenge. One does not get much sleep. But I also say to them, this is what I came here for. this is absolutely what I came here for. And I came at a time where I feel got a little energy in me. This is the time to do what I'm doing, sir. So, against that background, sir, I thank the honourable member from St. James Central for beginning to introduce in his intervention the tremendous reforms that I have had the pleasure of leading together with the Honourable Prime Minister in the area of planning and development policy, in the area of land use policy. And so I do appreciate the questions of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We all have perceptions of the job that we have to do. We all have perceptions of the role that we are meant to play. The Honourable Member for St. Michael West, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, has such ideas of what that role is. And I think that we have to understand that perspective. And so when he frames his questions, or claims of questions as he does, I think that one would understand that perhaps he is doing so with a view to generating public discourse. And I am happy to engage in the discourse. And so, having thanked the Honourable Member for St. James Central for starting to allude to some of the reforms, I want this morning, sir, to give some color and some depth and some context and some texture to what the Honourable Member before me started to discuss. It is absolutely true that any government must have a particular approach to land use policy as perhaps one of the most important resources in an open, small island economy. And so, yes, I was very happy to begin in June 2018, along with the Honourable Prime Minister, discussing the changes to the Town and Country Planning Act, what is now called the Planning and Development Amendment Act of 2020, that really laid out a whole new approach to the use of land and to planning. And one of the very important approaches, again, that the Honourable Member before me made reference to, but I want to really explain carefully. Because I think sometimes we use words, we use expressions, and there can sometimes be a bit of a misunderstanding of what is the mechanism that we're talking about. And this is a mechanism under planning law all over the world. The use of planning obligations in the regulatory procedure of getting planning approval. And what are planning obligations? And why do they exist? The reason for planning obligations, and I need to make myself very clear on this. It is to be able to manage the overall balance of development. What do I mean by that? You may have a development coming that is going to take a certain amount of land out of a certain kind of production. It might be agriculture, it might be residential, it might be some kind of use that the land is already in that is going to have implications for the balance of development. The balance of development is making sure that you are using your land to the best overall well-being, economic and social and otherwise, of the country. And so what we are doing through the Planning and Development Act and through the Physical Development Plan, which I'll come to later, is making sure that we have a sound balance of development. So what does that mean? It means that if you are having an environmental impact on the one side, that you are accounting for that impact on the other side by giving some benefit to the people of the country. By giving some benefit to the people of the country. On an island the size of ours, with Barbados having been through what it has in its development as a post-colonial society, and in some ways, some might argue, in many ways, still a colonial society, but that's another conversation for another day. But Barbados having gone through the development trajectory that it has, you cannot benefit from the patrimony of the country. You cannot have, as you must, an impact to your development footprint on the country and not seek to balance that by some matching contribution to that country's development. That's what planning obligations are about. And so we were able to use planning obligations as a development mechanism to be able to make land available for housing solutions. That's something that's not been done in this country before. That's something that in June 2018, we knew we had to do because we all know how large the country is, sir. Now, we started the discussion on the building out of the islands, seeking to create some more space. But the fact is that in June 2018, we had the land that we had, and we had to make use of planning obligations in order to be able to make land available for housing. We've used planning obligations, for example, in the case of the Hyatt development, and I don't want to speak in too much detail to something that is still the subject of legal agreement, but I don't think it is any secret that the whole point of having a discussion on how the Hyatt should develop is to be able to say that this development is a part of government's overall plan for the development of the urban corridor in Barbados. It was not just, and it is not just, should I put a hotel there or should I put a hotel there? And the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, the Honourable Leader of Opposition, knows this because these conversations started when he, or before he, saw it more useful or beneficial, other words one might use, to go in another direction where he now finds himself. But he was a part of those conversations. And so he knows that these conversations have been driven by, not by a developer coming in and saying, I want a hotel, but these conversations have been driven by this government's mandate and absolute priority to see the development of the urban corridor in Barbados. And so any hotel development that finds itself a part of that must contribute to that urban development, to that urban regeneration. When in April 2019, sir, I was given the privilege of leading the Tourism Investment Forum, what we said to all the developers who came at that time was, listen, I hate to put it this way, but your project is important, but it is incidental to, it is a part of the urban regeneration for the people of Barbados. And so the Hyatt planning obligations include everything from making sure there's space for cultural entrepreneurs, to making sure that we have certain agreements regarding how workers in those communities are going to be engaged. And so, I mean, let's not pretend that these questions have not been answered, that these questions are not going to be answered. I have no objection, once the project is going, to anybody being a watchdog and making sure that these things are happening. I think those things are important. I think it's absolutely important to hold developers accountable to what they say they're going to do to develop the communities around them. Go for it. I would submit that that's the role of an opposition, to actually base your remonstrations in fact rather than speculation about what might and might not be done. There's another development, sir, that is contemplated and has received planning permission in the north of the island. And as part of the planning obligations agreement with that development, it will see that hotel investing in the regeneration of community playing fields, in making sure that we are able to maintain the drainage solutions in those areas. And what we've said to developers is the following. We expect that we will have, in the case of Bridgetown, a Bridgetown Urban Rehabilitation Fund. In the case of Whole Town and the North, a similar fund to which developers can contribute to make sure that there is the ongoing maintenance of common services like drainage and so on that actually are very heavily impacted by major developments. This is how we have sought to use planning obligations, sir, to make available land for housing, for affordable housing solutions, to make sure that developers are contributing to the maintenance of common systems on which their development will be drawing and having an undue stress on the sanitation system, on the water system, and so on, to make sure that these developers are investing in the employment opportunities, the cultural activity, and the communities around them. And you know, there has actually been no resistance. Because I think developers now in 2021 realize that it is more beneficial to integrate with your community than to seek to be apart from it. And so, sir, planning obligations is a part of the new planning and development legislation. It's something that is a mechanism that demonstrates foresight. It demonstrates an approach to planning that we had not seen before. But I want to go further on this matter, sir, of land use policy. Now, the Honourable Member for St. James Central again made reference to a meeting that has been a part of a series of consultations on the physical development plan. The physical development plan of Barbados is where all of these issues of land use converge to be laid out in a very clear map, to be laid out together so that the people of Barbados can see this is the balance of development across land and water, across agriculture and water and energy and housing and commercial development and any other activities in which the people of Barbados would want to place their productive efforts. It is in the physical development plan. And so the meeting that the Honourable Member referenced that took place last Friday, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, the Honourable Member for Philip South, for honouring my request to advance that discussion, because as the member who has responsibility for making sure we finalize the physical development plan, I don't mind saying to you that I have been, my mother used to use the word gibbeting. I don't know if the young people in here would know that word. But I have been after colleagues to make sure that we have these strategic conversations, and colleagues have thankfully obliged because they're having similar discussions in their ministries, in their sectors. And so the Ministry of Energy was able to share with the Ministry of Investment and the Town Planning Office, which is a part of that ministry, been able to share what are their plans for reaching the targets in the energy policy and what will be the use of land that is required, what is the balance of ground-mounted solar PV as against rooftop-mounted solar PV, what is it that is required as an input that we have to make visible in the physical development plan. Similarly, for agriculture, given the nutrition security targets of the country, given the use of technology that we anticipate as against the use of open farming or the mix of the two, what is it that we believe will be the needs of the agriculture sector when it comes to land use. Now, note I say given the use of technology, because I don't think that given the land that we have, we can do all open farming all the time, forever and ever, and still meet the nutrition security targets of the country. But part of that conversation is, given the competing interests, I don't think it's unfair to call it that, competing interests of all the sectors that require land, what is the best balance that we can find? And that does include seeing what are the agricultural activities that can coexist alongside energy. That is one of them. But we also have to bring in the plans, sir, or the work of the water sector, and sanitation, and climate resilience, and environmental protection. These are all things that hang together. These are all things that are considered together in the physical development plan. Now, we have a 2017 draft, and you know, if you go on the town planning website, you will be able to see the draft physical development plan of 2017. It is a very good document, sir. But here's why it is being changed. It is being changed and is being updated with all of these policy considerations that we've been having consultations about. Because this Barbados Labour Party administration has come with so many transformational reforms in the last 3 years that they now have to be reflected in a revised physical development plan. There have been so many updates between the urban regeneration, the urban renewal of Bridgetown and the Greater Carlisle Bay Area, and the changes to the agriculture sector, and the changes to the energy sector, and the ways in which we are approaching housing. There have been so many transformations in policy that we are now producing a Physical Development Plan 2021 that will be the subject of public consultations with the people of Barbados. Now, the people of Barbados have seen the 2017 PDP. It is a good starting point to be able to discuss this transformation. But it has to be updated to reflect all of the things that we are now doing, to reflect the new approaches to housing, to reflect the fact that we expect to see the greater use of technology in agriculture and agribusiness, to reflect the fact that we are now going to be seeing the use of all kinds of different approaches to making sure we have people participating in their own climate resilience at the household level. So things like how we are able to use water tanks and double reticulation systems to make sure that people can use water that is collected in their tanks, making sure that we make investments in that kind of technology, making sure that we give people the financial wherewithal through revolving funds to be able to get access to the financing and to be able then to retrofit their homes in a way that is climate resilient. The use of battery storage in the energy sector, so that you're not just making use of the sun when the sun is at its height and generating energy, but that you can then store that energy to make use of it later to make your household resilient in the event that there is a disaster. All of these things, sir, are things that would make a 2017 physical development plan outdated and irrelevant. And so we've started the work and expect over the next few weeks to be able to update that PDP. That's the point that we had all these meetings. The reason we had all these meetings with energy and agriculture and water and housing and so on. But the other side of that is that it also has to reflect a balance of investment. And I talk about a balance of investment because, as we have also said, and the honourable leader of the opposition talked about, and it was amazing to hear, because he started in a place that he ended up. He started by asking about the connection between labor and land and ownership, and then answered his own question. Well, that is amazing. I would love to be able to eventually answer all of my own questions. Or I wouldn't even go left home any day come. But the point is, sir, is that we've also said with respect to ownership and the productive use of land, that our renewable energy projects and medicinal cannabis projects and other similar activities must have 30% local ownership. And we understand that is, you don't just say and it happens so. And so we've said, even if we have to set up a special purpose vehicle for government to be able to facilitate that ownership so that regular Barbadians could take their money from getting less than 0.1% in the bank and put it into the growth and development of the country, we as a government are going to facilitate that SPV or whatever are the governance mechanisms that are required to do that. That is how we are connecting land use and financial resilience of people and their ownership in what happens in this country, their participation in growth in this country. You know, I feel that sometimes we are stuck, and I say we collectively, that some of the public, the general thinking on certain issues is stuck back in some time where you thought that government had to be everything to everyone. Governments do not grow. The private sector grows. Government's role is to facilitate that growth. The reason that we had such a disastrous previous administration and previous period of governance is that the last government had no ideas. There was not an iota of innovation to be found in the policies that they introduced to seek or to suggest or to pretend to generate growth in this country. They thought that everything, you had this sectoral approach, and government would take out the money in its pocket and put it in there and had to drive growth. Well, we all know that that does not work, certainly not in economies like this, where governments like ours don't have the fiscal space to dump all of our money in trying to get the private sector or trying to get private enterprise to get growth happening. So our role, as we have done through the Hope Project, is to come up with the mechanisms to enable the private sector to do what the private sector needs to do. And when I talk about the private sector, I'm talking about foreign direct investment. I'm talking about people in Barbados who have the financial resources, and I'm talking about people in Barbados who may not currently have the financial resources, ordinary Barbadians, but who have the ideas, who have the willingness, and who must have ownership in the growth and development of this country. Let us not pretend that that has not been the goal and the objective and the mandate of this Barbados Labour Party administration. And so when we talk about creating a company, creating a special mechanism so that we can get housing solutions to Barbados today, that is a part of the governance innovation that this Barbados Labour Party government has brought to how we do things. Gone are the days where you had to try and find the room, where you had to try and find the fiscal space, where you had to try and find the money in an existing enterprise. That's not what central government is there for, and that is often not what even state-owned enterprises are there for. Because they have to respond so broadly to the needs of every Barbadian that they cannot then focus on what are these specific interventions that are going to add value quickly to the lives of Barbadians. I'm looking as I speak very much into the eyes, because she's wearing her mask, of the honourable member for St. Michael Southeast. Because when I talk about housing solutions, I can't help but look at her. She understands that we have concerns about overcrowding in certain areas. And let us be real. Let us be real. In a situation where you have a pandemic, where distancing is one of the most important health interventions you can make, we saw even more clearly in the last 15 months. How we have to be able to ease the pressure in certain households and ease the pressure in certain communities by providing housing solutions today. Mine is the Ministry of Planning, so we are always doing planning work. And part of the work that we were doing this morning, very early, that the economic team met to talk about, we did a very simple exercise, which is to say to everybody around the room, if you were to say, what is one of the main development concerns of Barbados today, it would have to be housing. So I am going to wait to get the National Housing Corporation in shape to be able to deliver financially and otherwise I don't know how long that's going to take. I'm sorry, I'm being straight. I cannot wait for that. But this Barbados Labour Party administration has the wherewithal, has the grey matter, and has the innovation to be able to say, okay, these are the tools at our disposal under the law, under the Public Financial Management Act and all the other things that govern us. And this is what we are going to use. But I go further. On this question of the relationship between labor and land, well, that is exactly the reason that Hope was created. That is exactly the point where it made me almost think that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was there. I mean, I get confused sometimes remembering when he was there and when he wasn't there, because, I mean, there's so much planning that we did together at one time. So sometimes, you know, I get the days confused. But that is the reason that Hope was created. Because we knew that nurses and police officers and teachers and people earning less than $4,000 a month, that's who Hope Direct is for. We realized that if we did not intervene to give those people a fighting chance to own a home and to own land and to be able to have a little kitchen garden perhaps somewhere, and that's really Lear's land lease and the other things that the Honourable Member for St. Philip South is working on. If we didn't do that, let us be real, they would never have an opportunity to own a home. The Honourable Member for St. James Central spoke about going to school and graduating and having some papers and earning in a way that he was so lucky to be able to earn. Not everybody is that blessed. And so the very important roles that these people play, that quite frankly in our entire economic system is undervalued. Not just undervalued in Barbados, all over the world. Teachers, police officers, nurses, people who keep us alive. Mr. Speaker, these people keep us alive. All over the world. And I hesitate to say this in the company that I'm in, but I feel that I would rather pay a teacher and a nurse than a lawyer.
Don't get in any trouble therefore.
But the point I'm making, sir, is that in terms of a social good, the work that these people do, and sir, you know, you made the intervention that you just made, but you wear another hat that fits in this category, which is that of being able to provide social work and social services to the people of a country. Those things are so critical. And if we can't, because of how much our economic system globally is skewed towards commodities and consumption of goods, as opposed to the consumption of critical services to people's well-being, if we cannot address it through wages, we have to address it through making sure that these people have a shot to own house and land in this country. But that is what Hope Direct is. I mean, as I was writing down the thing that the Honourable Member for the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said, well, I couldn't even relieve the words that I was writing. That was the reason Hope was created. Realizing, too, that there are different levels of income earner who are going to need different kinds of housing solutions, but our priority at the time was for these groups of people. So, sir, there's so much that can be said in terms of what our land use policy is and looks like. The Planning and Development Act, the Physical Development Plan, which will be the subject of consultations with all Barbadians. I mean, where you can see that
I remember you have 2 more minutes.
the way that we use land for all of the things that we prioritize. And not just that, the way that we use the marine environment for all the things that we prioritize. Because again, we're not just talking about the terrestrial endowments of the country. We have a marine space that is 424 times the land space. And so the Physical Development Plan also takes account of that space. And what are the plans to make sure that we get the best value from those resources? So, sir, I sought only in supporting and in lending my voice to this debate to really just put some things in context. And it gives me pleasure to do so because the responsibility that I have for this balance of development, for land use policy, for planning as a way to facilitate investment, that has been my absolute pleasure over the last 3 years to help contribute to the people of Barbados. So I was compelled to stand, sir, and give some clarity to my friend, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Because Kader, he only asking questions. You must can answer. With those few words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honorable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support my colleague, the member for Christchurch West, and his resolutions, but it would have been remiss of me not to add my voice to this particular debate. Basically because many years ago, 1998 to be exact, I raised my voice then in another capacity, looking at how land was being used in Barbados in a song called These Fields and Hills. And it has been one of those things that I've been very passionate about for a very long time in terms of how we do that. I am proud to be a part of this administration to say this is the first time in a very long time that I've seen some sort of innovation come into play that gives people, and I'm not going to use the term ordinary people because I've said it on a number of occasions, we're all ordinary people. So don't get tired. We're all ordinary people. But this is one of the first times that I've really seen a concerted effort being made to empower those who find themselves probably at the lower echelons of the society. We have seen developments going on at Tues. We've seen work done at parish land, as mentioned. I was privileged to go over to Chancery Lane to see what is going to be happening there. And there are a number of other things that are going to be coming into play. What I would like to suggest, though, to the Leader of the Opposition is that maybe he should take a ride with me, a trip with me one of these days. I go around the island every weekend. Yes, we should. Because I go around the island every possible weekend. Just for the reason of being able to see what is happening across the island, so that I have a better idea of where we are and where we are going. And so sometimes you need to get out of your comfort zone and go and look for yourself. And I say that not only for the Leader of the Opposition, but for sometimes when I listen to the call-in programs and I listen to people speaking with a manner of authority about things that sometimes they absolutely have no clue about. It is incumbent on me to try to correct some of these things when I get the opportunity to do so. Barbadians should be very proud of themselves as to where they have come based on the history of this country. And oftentimes I come in here and I listen to people, and I listen to the radio, and I look on social media, and I see people tearing themselves apart. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that everything that any particular government or administration at any point in time has done has always been the best. But we're not perfect. This we all know. But when we talk about people being able to have access to land and the value of it from a child, my grandparents, my parents, and I'm sure most people in here's parents and grandparents would be ringing in your ears morning, noon, and night the importance of owning, as they would say, a piece of the rock. And you can see across the length and breadth of the country strides that have been made over years. I mean, I have to say this because sometimes I believe I sound like a stick record, but I'm learning that repetition sometimes is necessary to drive home some points with people. I can only speak from 1970 when I landed here. But what I have seen over those years in terms of people being able to change their conditions, in terms of where they were living, starting off sometimes by, as the old people would say, building on a little piece here, butting on another piece there, moving from chatter houses to wall houses to some huge monstrosity sometimes, which even in that, when we talk about land usage, people have to begin, not just government policy, but people in general have to begin to think about how is it that we're actually going to use the land space. Are we going to continue to build these huge houses going wide, or are we going to use the land in a completely different way and build more vertical? Then you have, again, the whole idea of the land usage, not just for housing or not just for food, but the honorable member responsible for cleaning and greening this country continues to speak to us about using the land and planting trees and looking at the fauna and the flora and all of these different things in being able to provide cleaner air quality, being able to have a better experience in terms of the environment, in looking at not just, again, those things, but he takes it even further, looking at our beaches, how we treat to that space and these sort of things. All of those things are part and parcel of the policy of how we use the resources that God has so graciously given us in terms of the land. So for any of us to put farm over function, which unfortunately seems to be the way that too many people in Barbados operate at the level of farm. So you will hear people saying things like, oh, what is the policy? I haven't seen a policy paper. I've come into this for the very first time. I see policy papers from 1970 something. But if you don't implement anything out of the policy paper, it is what it is. Just words on paper. And so what we have to deal with is not just the policy itself, but the implementation of these policies. You know, I have said back then that if you're talking about, and the honorable member for St. James Central made the point, Barbados is not going to get any bigger unless we get the islands that we're talking about then. That would give you a little bit more space. But it's not going to get any bigger. Which means it may have the capacity to get smaller, you're right. But it's not going to get any bigger. But we have to find ways to ensure that as many people are housed, as many people are fed. one of the things that I really would like Barbadians to begin to think about is this whole idea of land ownership in the way that we saw it in the past. You know, historically, when the slaves saw master, what did master have? Land and transportation. Two assets that slaves had nothing to do with, couldn't do it. But it seems as if all we continue to do is to perpetuate the same thing from one generation to the next. Get as huge a house as humanly possible, get bigger and bigger every year, and get as many cars as humanly possible, and get more and more. So you got one household, 3 people, 14 cars. These are some of the things that we have to begin to think about. Because if you're talking about using land space, and you got so many cars, you got so much emissions and stuff going out into the environment, you're creating more problems for yourself. Bad use of your land space, having all of these things around. So I'm just trying. I'm not might go off track just a little bit, just to make the point that we've got to look in the private sector, not just at the governmental level in terms of policies. We have to look in the private sector with people who are building and who are doing all of these other things as to how do you use the land. And if we're talking about using the land itself, one of the things that we seriously have to look at and to engage with is the price of land. I know it's at a premium. We live in a small place. This is true. But if you want housing for a large number of people, the price of land cannot continue to go up and up as it has been doing over and over. There has to be some way of controlling that. Because what it does, like it or not, is that it makes it a lot more difficult for a large number of people to ever to be able to say that they would actually own one. The good thing about what this administration is doing at this particular point in time with the projects that are out there is that it's making it not only easier for people to own these things, but it also puts them in a position where they have something that they can pass on to another generation. And that has been where we have failed as a people oftentimes. The ability to pass on that which we've got onto a next generation that they themselves can either build on and further pass on to others. The reality is that among us, a lot of our people had land at some point in time. We don't like to go these conversations because it gets very testy. But a lot of our people had lands. And at some point in time, they felt in some way that maybe they needed cash over land or other things. And so we have to seriously think about how we even have trained ourselves, right? When the leading opposition talks about the value of the land, how much we have done in terms of teaching our people about this land as an asset and the things that you can use it for, other than just living or planting food on. These are the conversations that, in my mind, that we need to begin, because the same mistakes of the past, and for any of you who are in this chamber or who are listening to me now, who have not heard the stories of people going to Panama and coming back and buying lands, and even owning plantations, and in Tues they were back out of their hands and all these things. These are problems that come with a lack of understanding as to the value of these types of assets. But I digress a little bit just to make that point, that there are things that we as a people have to do for ourselves. No government can set a policy in place to make that happen for you. have to get out there and understand these things for yourself. Information goes out, yes, but if you don't pay attention to the information, then you find yourself in the same position time after time after time after time. As I said, I came in 1970. I grew up in an area where land was there, my aunt's house was there, my grandmother's house was there, another aunt's house there, and then what happens? You just go back and look at some very simple things. As soon as some set of people get a little bit more affluent, move out. move out of these spaces. And as they move out of these spaces from one generation to the next, people move out and people move out. Lands become available, especially if you got children who move on to higher and better things or live overseas or whatever else, so they got to sell it. And all of these things are part and parcel of some of the things that create some of the problems for us. Where we talk about ownership and these type of things. You cannot get away from it. One of the things I always advise people to do is to not run away from the reality that faces you. Because even if you turn your back on it and run away from it, it is still there tomorrow morning when you wake up. It's not going to go away unless there's a considered effort to re-educate people about how they deal with these types of things. Now, this administration, again, as I said before, is making, in my mind, a monumental effort to ensure that as many people as humanly possible have access to land and access to housing. It is impossible to have 100%. Nowhere in the world can anybody show me any administration or anybody at all who has the ability to ensure that everybody in his country, island, continent, whatever, has access to land. The reality is that some people will never have the ability financially to do it, which means that the policy in terms of being able to create rental units is, again, vastly important. Because what is the most important thing? Is it to house people or for people to own houses? You have to make the difference between the two. To own a house is good. You can beat your chest and say, yes, I own a house. But if you look at somewhere like Germany, for example, where very few people are into owning houses, and this is what you will call one of the developed, highly technical and highly advanced. Exactly. But the other idea of owning a house and owning property and owning land is completely different. And in a small space like this, 166 square miles, sometimes when I hear people talking, I sometimes wonder if this is the same Barbados that you wake up in every morning. Because the way they speak, you would think that this is the size of Russia. But it's 166 square miles. We gotta be frank, and we gotta be realistic about what it is we can do within a small economy also at the same time. So, Mr. Speaker, like I said, I don't want to be long on this because a lot of the points that were already made, I don't think that I have to go over them. They've been well made and they've been well documented. But I think at some point in time, when we are dealing with some of these things, and politics is what it is, and I don't think it will ever change. And as the old people say, I may talk till the cows come home. It will not change because some people believe that this is the way it should be all the time. There's nothing wrong with anybody opposing anything. You have a right to oppose, and you should, because it keeps everybody on their toes, and not everybody knows everything, so sometimes oppositions will see things that you may not see yourself and point you in another direction or jog your memory to get you to think about doing things in a different way. But what I get upset about is when we close our eyes purposely. When we close our eyes, our minds, our hearts purposely, and are driven only by the need to oppose, that is when we begin to lose sight, pardon the pun, of the real purpose of opposition. And this is not for the leader of the opposition. This is for the many leaders of the opposition that they have outside of these chambers. And so, Mr. Speaker, again, I want to say that time will tell. As these projects come out, are rolled out one after the other, you will see the response already, and the honorable member for Christchurch West can tell you, the response to Hope Direct, Hope Premium, all of these has been overwhelming, which means that there are persons out there appreciative of the effort that is being made to ensure that people have access to homes and by extension, access to land. Because I think sometimes we lose the point that each time you buy the home, you're not buying the home by itself without the land. It's coming with the land. So I mean, when I hear people talking, sometimes I'll be honest with you, Mr. Speaker, you will see that I keep very quiet sometimes because I get very passionate about some of the things when you make these kinds of pronouncements in here and on the outside. When you say things like people not getting access to land. But if you're buying the houses, you have access to land. And if the government has made a provision for the private sector to have access to the land, who may have the wherewithal to produce housing projects that people can get, to buy. But again, you're doing it on two fronts. You're putting the land there that people can do it. You're building the homes yourself in some areas that people have access to it. How could, it's beyond me that anyone can question, that this is a good thing. Unless I personally am not seeing it, whatever it is, I can't see how anyone can. But then again, like I said earlier, politics is what it is. But Mr. Speaker, I thank you for indulging me for those few minutes, and I'm obliged to you. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member St. Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, I shall be very brief because I sat here and I listened very carefully to a lot of what transpired this morning. And I want to state clearly that my role for being in this noble institution is because I came deliberately to serve people and not to come to this honorable chamber and leave in half hour, 45 minutes to go back home or to go back anywhere else. I have come to serve the people of Barbados, as I believe all honorable members here have. And therefore, I want to make my comments in relation to housing, where we have come from, and how our people as a nation can develop. And I believe that in my capacity here as a member of Parliament for St. Thomas, would have had even a more direct experience in growing up in a humble environment with very limited resources or facilities at all, but with wonderful parents and guardians and neighbors and teachers and others who have brought us thus far. Our home environments were poverty-stricken. And I support any exercise, despite whatever government it is, that seeks to empower people through giving them better home environments in which to live and to exist. And I call a lot of what I'm seeing, not only in this honorable chamber, but of course the length of Barbados, an element of snobbery that pains me deeply when it comes to stigmatization of people or persons because of where they have come from or where they have been to school or where they live. And I know better than anybody else in here understand it. Growing up in a neighborhood where there was no ownership of the land that we were on. And therefore my mother tried as best as she could. My father was not as productive in that way. To be able to buy a spot and to say, this is for my children. But not everybody has that kind of intuitive thought or experience or opportunity to do it for their children. And I support any government, I do not care which political persuasion it is, that seeks to empower people by giving them better home environments in which to live. And I would have been saving some of my expressions today for another kind of debate, and not just associated with correcting those challenges or those matters associated with rentals by properties for expansion of car parks and other facilities therein. And I think that we as a people are becoming very selfish with the snobbery that we have, when we know that among us there are thousands of poor people, workers who require just that lease, that opportunity to be able to own a piece of the rock. And in the light that my mother as an agricultural laborer was able to muster and run a meeting turn to pay down on a little spot to help her children to have a better life, I believe that everybody's aim or goal is to do so. Everybody can't do it at the same time. It takes time. So I never thought as a young girl growing up that I would ever own a house. Of spot, Fathermore House, let me say it that way. But it is because of the opportunities that were opened up to us by successive governments for people to be able to own a piece of this rock. So I remember as a young girl going to school in the city, hearing of a place down the Harbor Road that we call Rotten Town, where almost every house on that road was as rotten as anything. But they had a member of parliament subsequent to that, who was now deceased, who sought to assist those people in upgrading their houses. And I am sure that the government sector would have been behind to be able to make that difference and give those people a better opportunity to live a better quality life and to empower themselves. I had the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, sir, to go to Rock Hall St. Philip. And I am still mesmerized at how those persons that were living on that what was being a former dump are still living. And I commend this government for making an effort to improve the quality of the life of those people. Where I went with 3 other ministerial colleagues and some other persons in the community to have a look and to see what can we do as a government and report to the then Honorable Minister of Housing as to how these people can have a different way of living. And the other important thing about it is that they were so resourceful. If you see what they are doing to be able to maintain a better quality life. Some of them had even the solar panels on their houses because there was no electricity, there was no proper road, there was no running water, they were buying water, but they had a kind of camaraderie where they even invited me to come back by the moringa tree on a Saturday evening to play a game of dominoes with them. They had their own community spirit and village life coming together to show we are here, we're living on this dump, we're squatting, but we are human beings too. And so bringing back the reports and working, this government determined we're going to help those people, but we're not going to help them alone. We're going to help those at the bell. We're going to help all the other persons in Barbados incrementally to give them a better lease on life. Now, Mr. Speaker, without the input of a then administration under the Barbados Labour Party, when in 1981 we saw the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, that poor people who worked on plantations like my mother, who could not get a spot, they had to live in a chattel house, pick it down when you went somewhere else to work without the permission of the plantation owner. We have changed that whole culture through the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, empowering people in rural Barbados to be able to own a piece of the rock. And today when you travel the length and breadth of this country, from the north to the south, from the east to the west, you are seeing villages where people now have what we used to call as children bungalows. They are living a better quality of life. They've got the water, they've got the electricity, they've got just about everything. And you know what also hurts? many of those persons still look down on the very poor. And my emphasis here today, Mr. Speaker, sir, are connected with those persons that I see and all of us see every day. But because of that project, or those projects we are doing in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, we're persons that are in the Human Strengthening Project. It is an IDB project, but we have now identified 250 families in that project who are at the lowest of low when it comes to the quality life that they are living under, particularly with housing. Many of them have not got any employment. Many of them, they get their children, and rather than move away from the mother's property or house, they add on a little shanty. They are people too, and they have children. And then another child comes along and says, well, I have my own children, and I want to add on another piece. So we have some households with 15 and 20 people in them. And therefore, they need the space. We have the housing units, and we know that since the 1950s and 60s, those houses were built for a father and a mother and perhaps a child. Now some of them have 7 and 8 children, and those in the Pine and in some other communities are overcrowded. We need to create spaces for our people, and I want the Honourable Minister to pay close attention to have open spaces in these projects so people can come out and create the green space, the playing parks, and so we'll help them. And so I want to say, Mr. Speaker, the projects that we are looking towards expanding are to empower Barbadians that they can get a better quality life to go forward. Earning a piece of rock is hard for those persons who are cooks, some in the hotels, some in the other areas, those persons who are shop assistants, and I want to commend the Honourable Minister of Labour for the minimum wage effort that has been legislated within recent times for the $8.50 per hour. It has been long overdue. Who is going to benefit? The same poor people who are going to be the ones to get some of those houses when they apply that are working for under $2,000 per month. Who are they? Barbadians. The ones in Hall St. Philip, Barbadian children. The children, when we took the notes, many of them were going to Barbadian schools. They were born here. It is just how some of their parents may have been non-nationals. But our Barbadian males and females are cohabiting with them, and they're producing children that are Barbadians. So for me, the stigmatization has to go. We as a people must look forward, embrace, uphold. For when we leave people living in those sad conditions, where they are living 15 in a household, can't turn around, you're going to get all kinds of negatives. You're going to get a lot of infighting. You're going to get incest. You're going to get all kinds of negative things happening, and the poor quality lives they're living will impact on our health system that we are now trying with the Honourable Member for the city and others to uplift and make sure that quality environs are available, that people are keeping around them clean, that the Ministry of the NCC, the National Conservation Commission, is making efforts to beautify and clean up our villages to make a difference in the quality life we have. And so I want to salute this government for taking that bold step of making sure that different categories of people get opportunities for them to purchase the houses or the land and to enhance themselves and the quality of lives they live, because we are a government that believes that we are going to work with our people to move them from dependence to independence. And the only way we can do it is when we help them with jobs. Otherwise, some of those communities with the large numbers of persons who are not as well educated, or they might be, but they don't have a skill. And because of COVID, it is even making a situation worse, where the same guys and gals that will be on the streets or going around and moving around and shopping and so now have to be at home with no proper employment, no proper nutrition, and they're really at the mercy of others to survive. And so any effort that the government pushes to make sure that people get gainful employment, to ensure that they have a shelter over their heads, to ensure that their quality of life is uplifted, that the training happens for them to be able to develop skills, to be better educated, that they can serve their families, will be supported by me. I have constituents who are needy. I am here to speak for them as well, for us to get housing. And the Honorable Minister will tell you, I would have sent him a note in the early hours of this morning in connection with a visit where I know that persons will be able to get a house spot in the parish of St. Thomas once that agreement is made. People sometimes have the money, but they cannot get that opportunity because the housing costs are so pitched that the spots are so pitched, so highly pitched, they cannot afford it. We need to embrace everybody and ensure that whatever we do in Barbados, that we include people and their needs, particularly their health and their social needs, to be able to bring them to that level. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am happy for the opportunity, for the visionary concept by the Honorable Minister of Housing, where he has come up with these different scales or tiers of persons who can benefit by the projects that have been identified, because there's absolutely no point in us trying to reach a stage of development, but we are leaving people behind. Our mantra still is a better life for our people, leaving absolutely no one behind where possible to be able to make that happy mix that we can live all together in this society, knowing and respecting and caring and loving each other despite whatever level we are perceived to be at. And there's that element of stigmatization, of snobbery in this place. And I'm not talking this honorable chamber, sir, I must confess. I mean across the island, where it is dividing and ruling and changing the whole culture of what we knew, where everybody respected each other despite their status or religion or political persuasion or employment or whatever the situation is. And so I am glad to be a part of this institution, sir, where we can work together to make that tremendous difference and not behave in a way as persons who are supposed to be role models, or in the eyes of Barbadians, people see members of parliament as the persons to look up to be the guide. The smallest question they have, they're called to say, can you tell me when we're going to get the vaccine? It is on the air. But they believe sometimes, if I call my member of parliament and the member of parliament tells me, well, that is correct. But that is all right. But I want for us, not as a people, because we may have reached these high levels in society wherever we are working or whatever institutions we represent, or even in this honorable chamber, for any moment at all ever, seek to indicate to the rest of Barbados that that whole system that we looked at and we experienced before, that you can get up the ladder and kick it down, that must remain. It has to stop. I believe that we are here to serve. Yes, we're going to have our different political differences and challenges and so, but at the end of the day, we have come to serve people. And politics is not only about the people, but it is for the people. And therefore, any effort at all that this government makes to help to secure housing and to put people in a better position socially, economically, or any other form of development, I am happy to support. And I know that once those young men and women get that opportunity to move away from certain environments that are so crowded, to get space, some of the lawlessness will be minimized. They will see themselves in a better condition, rather than people partitioning them. Don't go down that road, them fellas down there, them down there poor. All kinds of madness that our educational system now has to change if we are to let people know we value you as a human being despite wherever you have come from. For as if I were seen, Mr. Speaker, sir, as somebody who lived in a village up in Val Road, Ermin and Joe for a little busy daughter, because that's what some people said. Our daughters, because there were 7 of us and 1 brother.
I remember, be careful with the language.
But you know, sir, that was only the little Birchan that thing there. But I meant so poor that we did not even have a proper bed. I'm saying that. And then, oh, she could be an MP. That man used to drive the bus daughter, and that woman that the hawk, and that is the mentality. If we are saying we are educating, Madam Minister of Education, we have to change that culture, that attitude, that kind of behavior that is causing so many people who have potential to stay away because they feel we will never ever be able to get there because we have no house, we have no land, we are renting. And I close by saying, Mr. Speaker, I am happy for this because we've had women in particular who have been working for years. They've been saving the money, but because they could not own a piece of the rock, they are now shut out of their houses. We have women on the road with children. We have Lancaster is full. All the facilities are full because there's no room, and they lost their work. Had not for this government put in the $600 amount to the adoptive family and the household mitigation unit, we will not be able to save so many of these lives. I want to highly commend the Honorable Minister and all others who are working in the vanguard to change the culture of this country socially, economically, and otherwise, and therefore I lend my strong support to whatever is happening here with the housing projects, and I know that I will get another opportunity when the full discussion takes place to be able to put in my 5 cents worth, because at the end of the day, I close by saying every individual is important, not only in our eyes, but in the eyes and the sight of God. And we must, as a people, continue to serve and serve well, especially when we reach this level, knowing perhaps when we were small, you'll never get there. But it is God's divine intervention that has brought all of us here, and we must continue to work together as a people to change this whole culture of the stigmatization and so on around, and to help to house our people who need it now more than ever. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I remember for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to speak for a few minutes on this, on the land resolutions, because the land policy and the program for housing being put forward by this government is going to mean a great deal to ordinary Barbadians across this country, all of us. And I look forward very much to the housing that will, first of all, provide units that are within the reach of many of our citizens, young people who maybe have jobs and are looking forward to having their own homes, but because of the economic circumstances, because of the challenges that this country has been dragged through for past 10 years under the Democratic Labour Party, many of them are unable to leave home to start their own families because they have not been able to secure a home that they could get that start that they wish. And therefore, the project that is being put on the table by this government to provide housing for people between $2,000 and $4,000 of income a month is going to mean a lot to a lot of young people, because they suffered greatly during the COVID. When COVID hit and they were home and many of them could not work and they could not pay for that apartment, many of them left their homes and went to rent apartments in the residential areas, feeling confident that this was their start to move up, and they hoped that they would have been able to start saving, that they could get a mortgage. Those hopes were dashed during the period of the Democratic Labour Party government, and then COVID also resulted in a slowdown. And many of them then found themselves having to go back home. So this program that is being put on the table, Mr. Speaker, by the Honourable Member for Christchurch West is something that will make a great deal of difference to those young people who are looking forward to moving up in life and prospering. But it's also of great importance, sir, to the people who are earning under $2,000 a month. Sir, in my constituency, there are many young people who find themselves having to put up a shack in the yard. There are people who their homes have become overcrowded. And sir, sometimes just to get some breathing space, just to remove themselves from the setting where maybe they're getting on each other and they need a breather, many of them go outside, sir, and sit down in their cars, if they have one. That's the only place that they could cool their heads for a moment, catch their breath before they re-engage. And every day, sir, the call is made to the constituency office for housing. Is there anything you can do? My circumstances are difficult. Many of them have found themselves in a situation, sir, where sometimes discord in the home may result in them having to leave home, but very often with nowhere to go. And sir, a program such as what the Ministry of Housing is putting in place to assist us to be able to do something very positive for the people of this country, sir, this is going to make a tremendous difference. But there's another category that I want to raise, sir, that I believe that as a government we need to see what we can do. Indeed, I have to agree with the view that being able to have a piece of the rock, being able to own a home in this land is an asset that Barbadians strive for, and it's an important one. But sir, many persons have run aground in striving to get that asset. Sometimes difficulties might make it difficult for them to complete a house that they've started building and not have any options as to how they could rearrange themselves to be able to complete it. Some of them, sir, may have bought some land, and circumstances have made it difficult for them to even start to build a house. And then the land becomes overgrown. It becomes a nuisance to people in the area. And very often they find it difficult to find a way to get forward with this piece of land that is supposed to be an asset. As a matter of fact, sir, as a result of not being able to manage it, very often the pressure of land tax and keeping it cleared presents a liability to them, and some end up having to sell it. And so the dream dies. And so, sir, one of the things I think that in our projection for the future that we want to be able to look at is what can be done, how can we assist, how can we train, how can we guide, how can we advise people in the acquisition of the asset of land and how to use that land in such a way that it is able to generate income for them rather than becoming a liability around their neck. We also have families, sir, that have been very diligent. And I've heard this story many, many times across Barbados, where people put aside money and acquire an acre, 2 acres, 5 acres of land. And the hope of the generation that bought the land was that it would be used effectively by the generation behind them to use it in such a way as to make a way for their children and their grandchildren. And sometimes, sir, families fall into disputes that then tie up that land, it can't be settled. Or sometimes they have the land and they would like to be a part of the group that gets the opportunity, sir, to be a part of a building program where they too can make some money off of selling their land and being able to do a housing development and to be able to give their families a big start. And sir, this is where my recommendation would be, that where you have private landowners, people with a 1 acre or 2 acre or 5 acre that want to get involved in a housing project, but their circumstances may not allow them to have the money, for example, to put infrastructure in place. Or, yes, they have the land, but the challenge, the stress of managing a housing project might be beyond they may feel it is beyond their ability to manage it. I believe, sir, that these people are good candidates for a joint partnership with government to look at providing housing for other Barbadians and empowering citizens with the opportunity to be involved in a building project that will help to put money in their families and give them another boost to take their families forward. Sir, I am satisfied. I'm satisfied that this government is seeking in every possible way to come up with innovative programs that will help our people with home ownership, that will provide jobs for thousands of Barbadians, and will give ordinary Barbadians the opportunity to participate in construction projects that will allow them to be able to earn and move on up. And so it is with my fullest support that I support the Honourable Member for Christchurch West and give my support to the resolution. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I raised wrap up this resolution of a lease of land to the Caribbean Development Bank. But obviously, the leader of opposition decided to go wide on this debate, and honorable members followed him and went equally wide. I want to thank all members who spoke. Indeed, when I listened to the honorable members that spoke, it somehow made me think of something that my mother always used to say, that cockroach has no place at full cockfight. And clearly the honorable members who spoke that defended this lease and defended the Ministry of Housing so appropriately and so adequately, it was clear that I was surrounded with my colleagues as full cocks, and the one single voice of a cockroach was trampled in this debate. But first, let me thank the member for St. James Central, who, as a consummate advocate, clearly advocated very strongly and appropriately the policies and programs of the ministry. And I want to especially thank him for his contribution. I also want to thank the member for St. Michael South Central, who set the program and the place as it relates to the policies of the government and how the housing policy has already been set out in legislation. I want also to thank the member for St. Thomas, who clearly set the aspect as it relates to how people relate from the point of view of the average person, and how the average person will be able to benefit from the housing policies. And also want to thank the member for St. James South, who brought in the concepts of the stakeholders, and how stakeholders, be it the contractors, be it the people in her constituency, and all others. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues have set the ground and defended the policy very, very well, and trampled that simple intervention by the leader of the opposition. But let me build on what they spoke on. First, let me talk about a symposium that we're putting together, not only to talk about how we take housing policy further in terms of the declaring the whole of Barbados as a registration district, and also to further flesh out housing policy in Barbados. We're having that symposium very shortly through the ministry, and I've asked the officials to make sure that they send a very special invitation to the Leader of Opposition to make sure that he joins us and to make any interventions that he may suggest in the question time. You know, Mr. Speaker, in my previous life as a dentist, as a neurosurgeon, we worked very hard to teach people how to take care of their teeth. Avoid sweets, brush your teeth 3 times a day, visit the dentist regularly. We worked hard to put ourselves out of business. And that was our job, because we saw that as our duty and our responsibility as professional people to give the best advice possible to reduce the amount of disease out there, to literally put yourself out of business. And now I find myself in a new job, trying to provide as many houses as I can as possible to put myself out of my other private business, which of course was to provide housing for rental for many, many people. But nonetheless, that is what we are striving to do. We recognize that there are many categories, that there are people with many income levels, 4,000 to 8,000. We said, okay, we would do a program for those people in that category. But we also recognize that the National Housing Corporation's experience in doing housing projects has not been stellar and has not been the best. And again, it brings me to this concept of cockroach has no place at a full cockfight. Because the last program that really and truly the National Housing Corporation did was the one at Parish Land, when they did, I think, 150, 200 houses, brought in contractors, and for years, those houses remained unoccupied and started to deteriorate. Indeed, up to this day, we're still having to go and fix problems that contractors brought on by National Housing Corporation did. In fact, the funniest thing about it is the then person that was the Minister of Housing who brought on those contractors to build those houses, many of whom were built inappropriately, sometimes in the wrong position, and have had problems, then went to try to defend those same people when he was the minister that did it in the first place. But I digress. So if the National Housing Corporation cannot really handle or had difficulties handling a project of that size, what difficulty would they have handling a project when we're looking to do 2,500? The capacity of the National Housing Corporation to handle that large a project was not there. So what did we have to do? We had to look at what government can do. You know, there's something called the frill of government. The frill of government. People ask me, and I say all the time, what is the frill of government? Well, governments can facilitate, regulate, innovate, and legislate. And we brought all of those things together when we started to bring the HOPE program together. So the HOPE Premium program is a joint venture program where government puts in not 1 cent. Not 1 cent. We have the land. So we're facilitating a private entity to come and build, to put in the infrastructure. And you know what it is? People say, oh, when you're going to build houses, you got to understand. You don't just wake up one morning and build a house. Mr. Speaker, you would know this. You may have acres of land, but you got to put in the road. And in order to put in the road, you know what you got to do? You got to design the development. You got to design development in terms of green spaces, in terms of water and how the water will be distributed, in terms of electricity and how the electricity will be distributed, in terms of the curbs and slippers, in terms of what is in the road, in terms of the drainage, in terms of wealth. You got to design that first. Then after you design it, you got to pass it through town planning and EPD and MTW and all those things. And when that is finished, you ain't built a house yet, you know? And when that is finished, then you then have to, after you get that, then you got to get the town plan aspect to the houses and design the houses separate from designing the roads. And then when you get that, you got to again get the financing. After you do the road, the financing, then to build the houses. And then financing in itself, anybody who has gone through one mortgage or one loan knows all of the application forms, all of the processes, the board, whatever, send back for more information, the legal aspect to it, you have to go through. All of that has to be done. And government at NHC was not in a position. I'll give you an example. And the legal opposition talked about it, about how we had changed a direction with land as opposed to house and land. And let me explain a little something. When I first came to the ministry, I recognized that they had land at a place called Deanstown Heights. The National Housing Corporation had it for sale for, I think, $28 a square foot. I said, no, obviously it wasn't selling. Let's bring it down to 18. Let's have a land fair and get these going. Hundreds of people came and signed up. In fact, they came, all had been signed up for before I even got there to speak. And I was happy and I was glad because I said, good, we were going to get some money, we were going to get some working capital on which we could do other projects. Because it was that working capital I was able to go and then start Tues. And I was about to start Rices and Applewitz, small developments, 15, 20 houses, whatever it is, infilling for the National Housing Corporation because I recognize those small things National Housing Corporation can do well and does very well. And I want to salute all of the people that work at the National Housing Corporation. They're a tremendous team, and I enjoy working with them every single day. But let me say, of those people that signed up, you know, one by one, they start to drop out. They start to drop out for several reasons. They start to drop out because they lost their job because of COVID. They're on 3 days because the hotel closed down. They forget that they had an approval from the mortgage company, but then they then realized that they had another car loan, that the thing, or another loan at the credit card, and so on and so forth. So those that may have qualified at first, they no longer qualify when deeper investigation is done into their finances or their situation changes. So what we found is that Yes, selling land is important, and there are some people who will only want land, and we get it, and we're going to have those programs. But we also have to recognize, and we also have to come up with an innovative way to reduce the cost of the land, because a lot of people were finding it difficult to pay for the cost of the land. And that's why we got the photovoltaics involved. And it's because the feed-in tariff for photovoltaic systems in Barbados is so competitive and at such a good rate that we're able to finance the cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the land, the cost of putting in the services through the signing over of the income from the photovoltaic system. And it is the innovative part of the program. So we're facilitating, we're innovating, we have the regulation, and we're legislating because we're driving the cost of land down by keeping the prices of the land down, by giving concessions in terms of duties and taxes to be able to keep the prices of the houses down. So all of these things bringing together to put our people to work, which is the number one thing. Number one, jobs for our people. Jobs. Apart from putting our people to work, we then have to house our people, which is number two. Jobs, housing. And number three, the revolutionary part of it is bringing back land prices, getting land prices back under control. You know, for too long, land prices were going up, up, up. 15, 18, 20, 25, 30. You know, it's good and bad. You know, the National Housing Corporation is in the process of selling some land now for upwards of, well, maybe I should not say it, but a big set of money. But it's commercial land. Commercial land. Now, commercial land has a lot to do with location, 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 location. And if I have commercial land, National Housing Corporation is selling or buying commercial land, then we're going to go for what the best price we can get. But when it comes to residential land, when it comes to putting in the services, when it comes to using the MTW to help us put in the services to keep the prices down, this is what we're trying to do. So we recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there's a lot of work to be done in housing. You know, we've talked about Hope Premium, we've talked about Hope Basic, and there's another program that I'm working on called Hope Basic. The Hope Direct and Hope Premium are the first two, those making 2,000 to 4,000 and 4,000 to 8,000. But the next program, and I don't want to give too much about it. I hear my colleagues talking about it before I talk about it. But I really don't want to give too much about it because we're still in the planning process. We're still putting it together for cabinet, but essentially for people who are making up to $2,000. Up to $2,000. So every income strata, everybody is going to get a chance. Will we be able to meet the need? There's no country. Even Germany, as the Honourable Member for St. Philip West talked about, even in Germany, I've been to Germany, Munich, Stuttgart, the festivals. Even in Germany, they have difficulty meeting the social needs of housing for people. And that's a first world country. So are we going to meet the demand? Probably not. Are we going to make a dent in the demand? Definitely, we're going to make a dent in demand. We're working on density reduction when it comes to the housing areas. We're working on rentals because we know that some people will have to have rentals, and we're attacking that. We're working on land. So those of you who still want to buy land, we got 15 spots still up there at Deanstown. I encourage anybody, call the National Housing Corporation, $18 a square foot, Deanstown, because other people dropped out. Your chance now to get in. And let us get things going. So lots of fronts, and then on top of it, the National Housing Corporation still has 1,400 units it has to maintain. And then on top of that, we're giving back the refunds to those who would have paid in, and so a lot of people have started to get back their deposits because we're going to enfranchise them and get their conveyances, give them back their deposits, and give them a chance as well. So we in the ministry, a lot of different fronts, working on a lot of activities, bringing a lot of imagination, building on the good work from the former minister, the member for St. Andrew, and as he passed the baton to me to continue the work at the Ministry of Housing. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member, you need to beg to move. Second. The question is that the resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Mr. Speaker, recommittal papers.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Central Bank of Barbados Annual Report for 2020.
Recommittal government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management and Vesting of Assets Amendment Bill 2021.
Recommittal first reading of bills.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the first reading of the Grantley Adams.
The bill be read the first time.
Yeah, that the bill be read the first time. The Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management and Vesting of Assets Amendment Bill 2021.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
We revert to government business.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I beg to move the adjournment of the House until the 8th of June at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be adjourned until the 8th day of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until Tuesday, 8th day of June, 2021 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.